Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to address this conference, and what a magnificent agenda that's been put together, and the organisers should be congratulated. To some extent, I feel a bit like a fraud standing here, because one thing that we are not at NBN Co is a content generator, and we're certainly not an education specialist. But my role is very much around bridging the gap between what we're doing as a platform to enable a whole host of exciting things, reaching out to the people who are actually genuinely doing the exciting things. And I think we've got a room full of people here that really know their stuff. But we are... hopefully I can impart some interesting information today. I want to just cover off on three things. One was a brief overview of the NBN. I'm hoping that everybody here has heard of the project. I think I can make that assumption. The second thing was just to go through what we're seeing happening in particular in the education sector and some of the exciting opportunities. And then finish off just briefly touching over what does the NBN mean for you as your organisation. And hopefully imparting some information that will encourage you to get online, connect and understand what the NBN means. So for those of you, and I assume there is no one in the room that's not heard of this project, this is the rollout map of the national broadband network across Australia. We're the largest infrastructure project in Australia at this moment in time, the largest project since the Snowy Mountain scheme. We're rolling out fibre to the premise technology to 93% of homes, schools and businesses across the country, and they're denoted by the tiny red dots on this map. And it just, I think, it's worth taking a moment to pause and think of the extremely enormous task we've got ahead of ourselves, and also the battles that we have in Australia as a continent that's a long way from the rest of the world, but also incredibly dispersed across our landmass. So achieving equity is just something that's really, really tough. While we've got fairly dense population around our 93%, the eastern seaboard, Perth and a couple of other places, there's large population of our country that don't live in those areas, the 7%, that still need to be considered in any national rollout. And in the world that we're operating at the moment, we'll be delivering fixed wireless and satellite services to those people. The fixed wireless is donated by the grey dots, which are sort of around the red dots, and the satellites are being launched. We're launching 2 satellites in 2015, and they're going to be covered by the green hexagons that are shown on the map. So our fixed wireless and satellite services will be capable of offering speeds of 25 megabits per second. Our fibre services that are being rolled out already can offer speeds of 100 megabits per second, and by the end of this year we'll have a gigabit product in market. So very exciting, a massive leap forward in what we're doing. I'm going to leave the pointy question, which I will tell you now, there's a very boring answer about what's going to happen with change of government. Someone's got to ask that question, but I'll save that very special answer to the end. We are operating at the moment as a wholesale-only open access network. So we don't sell direct to any customer. We don't sell direct to the end users. We sell direct to our customers, who are the retail service providers. So in some sense, we're a gap away from the world that you're operating in. But nevertheless, we're an incredibly important platform that's going to enable a whole host of very interesting technologies to be developed. And that's really where I wanted to focus for the next little bit of the talk. What are the exciting things that are happening, and what's the transformation that's going to take place? And just to bring us up to speed on that, I want to focus on another very important network. This is not our aerial rollout. This is actually the electricity grid, the network that was rolled out in the 20th century. It enabled phenomenal transformation in ways that at the beginning of the 20th century, people just could not imagine. Imagine a world whereby electricity doesn't exist. It has brought about probably one of the most fundamental changes in our society, the liberation of women into the workplace. Think of what's happened as a result of the electricity grid being rolled out and the way that it's transformed our environment. I think there's a couple of ways in which, three ways I would say it's transformed our environment. One is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. We assume the energy grid's there. The second one is innovation, and I'll come to that in one moment. To me, that's the most critical part. And the third one is around social equity, again, another very important part of any government policy. So if we think about the rollout of electricity and moving on to the point that I just made about innovation, considering how the electricity grid has transformed our environment in the home, well, the refrigerator has enabled the most enormous transformation in our society. At the start of the 20th century, shopping was a daily activity to go and get fresh food and vegetables. It meant that shops were very small, located in villages, and people could commute to their local shopping on a daily basis. Vegetables were primarily grown very locally to home, very small array of options available. But as a result of the electricity grid, innovation happened. And one of the innovations was the refrigerator. The refrigerator changed the home environment because it meant that shopping could become once a week activity. It meant that women didn't have to be in the kitchen, and there were a whole host of other applications there. It also transformed the entire sector of food and food logistics. Because of the refrigerator, we have supermarkets. Because of supermarkets, we have food logistics. Because of food logistics, we have an entire global ecosystem of food opened up to our doorstep. The same thing is going to happen from broadband in other sectors, and education is one of them. I believe the education sector is set for enormous transformation, and it will be opened up in a truly globalized way, in ways that perhaps now we can't quite imagine. And in fact, if I could imagine, I'd be the person being the Fisher and Paykel going off to invent the refrigerator rather than talking here about the possibilities. What's so exciting about this conference is we have the innovators in the room with us to think about how education is going to transform. Back to the electricity grid, it wasn't just the refrigerator, it was the washing machine. I still complain about my washing, but imagine spending a day doing it rather than an hour. Again, the innovation was what was brought about. The electricity grid was the platform, the innovation was the washing machine, and that has changed entire industries and enabled the liberation of women in the workplace. Of course, televisions, another innovation, kitchen appliances, irons, food, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on and on. And of course, how can you talk about electricity and innovation without talking about computerization and the applications that brought about? Just phenomenal changes that happened in the 20th century. So imagine sitting in a room like this in the 1920s, imagining what the electricity grid is going to enable for our society. Could you have predicted the changes that would have come about? Could you have predicted that our workplace would be entirely different, that women would be in the workplace in greater numbers, that email would be around, that a whole host of applications would just come through the community and change us in ways that we never knew impossible? We, in 2013, are sitting in that position right now. We are in the incredibly exciting part of our... we're living in an incredibly exciting time because we are the people that are shaping our future. And in 100 years, a whole load of sectors are going to look so very totally different. So that's the innovation, and I'll come back to that and sort of some of the innovations that we will talk about on the NBN and what exciting things we are seeing happening. But I want to spend one moment talking about equity. And I think an important part of the energy grid is equity and ubiquity. Now, notwithstanding pricing, and energy prices are certainly something that's been a very hot topic for a long time, we all have our energy grids at home. We all have them, and they are ubiquitous, and they are utility infrastructure. How many of you know how much power is transmitted down your energy grid? How many of you buy your pipe according to the size of it? You probably don't have much of a clue, but you do know you get a bill. Broadband, how many of you get a 12 megabits per second ADSL 2+ pipe and a 10 gig download limit, which you don't really know what 10 gig is, or at least the vast majority of the population doesn't know what 10 gig is. In fact, my mother said to me the other day, Kate, I'm downloading a photograph and I think it says that it's 1 gig. It's going to use up 1/10 of my download. She got her gigs and her megs confused, but nevertheless, it's really bizarre that we're living in a world where we're buying a product and spending quite a bit of money on that product without really understanding what it's about. When broadband becomes a truly ubiquitous utility infrastructure is the day that we don't worry about our pipe. How many of you went to Harvey Norman to buy a refrigerator and thought, oh, I wonder if that refrigerator is going to work in my house? Is the pipe big enough to enable that? The reality is we don't do that. What we worry about is it shiny? Is it white? Is it silver? The refrigerator component's too big, the freezer component's too small, I don't like the shelves in that position. It's about the application. And that's when we know broadband is a true utility and we're moving down the road to get there. So that's enough about innovation and the electricity grid. What is the national broadband network going to enable? And it's going to enable a whole host of applications. Of course, here today we're primarily focused on education, but I think it's worth saying that there are, again, enormous opportunities in government services, in health and community services, in business, and the list goes on and on and on. And many of the applications transcend different areas. And I would encourage you as an audience that's really, I think, leading the way in innovation and what can be done, particularly around video and interactivity. There are opportunities not just within the educational sector, but moving out and beyond. And I encourage you to think about those opportunities that exist, because there are some very real opportunities to merge, for example, health and education into applications. Of course, here today we're talking about education, and one thing I will say is I am not a teaching pedagogy expert, and nor is our company. But that's why earlier last year we commissioned a report with Ideas Lab looking at 21st century teaching strategies for a highly connected world. The report outlines a programme that 60 teachers took part in across 3 NBN connected schools in Wollonga, in PLC Armidale, and TAFE New England Institute. So between June and August last year, the 60 teachers participated in professional learning programme, face-to-face workshops and online courses. And the aim of these courses were to look at the ways technologies can be used over the NBN to open up new learning opportunities. And rather than starting with the silver bullet of how technology can change the world and what they're doing, the question that we asked them to ask was, what's now possible? So the teachers worked in teams looking at cross-curriculum-based programs relevant to their teaching, and the teachers were from a broad range of backgrounds. And over 8 weeks, they explored virtual pedagogies. Some of these teachers had experience and some of them didn't. Some came in with phenomenal support for the NBN, and some of them came in with a real agnostic or even feeling like it was encroaching on their teaching style. But of the teachers that were involved, and it was a small sample, only 60, but nevertheless 96% of the teachers believe the NBN will allow students to increase the quality of the work, and 86 thought that teaching over high-speed broadband would improve the way their lessons are delivered. These are pretty phenomenal statistics for a group of teachers, many of whom had never had any experience of teaching with technology. So I want to go through some use cases, and I do realise that I'm preaching to the converted here, and there's people who are far more expert at doing virtual video conferencing in the room than we are, and I certainly acknowledge the fabulous work of Karen Player and all the others at Virtual Excursions Australia. They're doing a really phenomenal job, and at NBN Co, we're really excited by that work. So one of the video conferencing technologies that we used in this trial was connecting students at Wollonga High School to the Bell Shakespeare company to undertake a class looking at The Tempest. The students were based in South Australia, and they would not have had the opportunity to have met with the company if it wasn't for video conferencing. I won't go into the details. I'm sure you know exactly what would have taken place in that classroom, but I do think it's worth reading a couple of comments that were said by the head of drama and arts, Rob Seidel, at the school. He said, "I've never been involved in a virtual link-up, but I was amazed at how the tutor and students were able to easily interact. It showed me that we are located hundreds of kilometres from the Sydney Opera House and the Bell Shakespeare Company. However, our students can still have a one-on-one learning experience with an expert on another state." He went on to say, "Because of an NBN connection and the quality of the images, the students really flourished. I've been a teacher for 34 years in drama, and most of my teaching has been within the four walls of a classroom. This has really taken it to a completely different level. It's made both myself and the students aware that there's another way to learn and a new way to teach." That's a phenomenal statement from this school teacher, and we're seeing that across the country as video is rolled out into classrooms. It's very exciting, and it's really opening up new opportunities. But it's not just the classroom that we're interested in, and in fact, if I can move on, it is classroom to classroom, but it's also classroom to home, and that's one of the things that the National Broadband Network, I think, often gets pushed down in the list of issues. We're connecting every premise across Australia: schools, GLAMs, galleries, art libraries and art museums, hospitals, businesses, and most of all, homes, our 12-point-something million premises across the country. So I think what's really exciting is to think about how education is going to transform in the home, not just between classroom and expert institution, whatever that may be. And I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to go into this. It's also very relevant to the type of student that you're teaching to, whether it's K-12, university, through to lifelong learning. There are, of course, different utilisation in different segments of our society. But nevertheless, I do see that there's a big difference there. So I'm going to go through some of the applications that we see are able to be used in the home as a result of the NBN. Of course, these apply to any building, any premise. It could be classroom to classroom. But we do see exciting opportunities in the home. Of course, the first one is just plain old computerization. We all know that. It's here, it's everywhere, and highly utilised by students. There's, of course, video conferencing, and video conferencing classroom to classroom is taking off. But also, we're really interested in classroom to home, and we are aware of groups that are looking at trying to push content, not just into classrooms, but, for example, to science groups in people's homes. We're also interested in technologies like sensor applications, the idea that you can collect data about your local environment and what that means to help you learn, whether that's your local environment in your house. I was just talking to someone before who's building a house and is putting sensors everywhere and is able to, I suspect, control environment and all sorts of things, but also how that sensor information can come from your local community, whether it's air quality information about the Great Barrier Reef, whatever it may be, that are going to impact on learning. We also see IPTV as being a really interesting platform, especially for education. I'll come to an example in one moment. Active gaming as a technology for learning is also something that we really see taking off, and there's certainly some really interesting research coming out of the US at this moment in time on active gaming and the pedagogy outcomes. We're also interested in robotics, ambient technology, and haptic devices, force feedback through the internet. And I'll go through a few examples. I'm going to take my hat off at NBN Co and put my former hat on. Some of these examples are ones that are very close to my heart from when I worked at the Institute for a Broadband-Enabled Society. It's an institute at the University of Melbourne. There are plenty of other examples around the country that are going on, but these are the ones that I certainly had a fair bit to do with. So one is sensor technology, and I think some of the exciting things that we're seeing there is around health monitoring, but as I say, also out to your community. How can you collect data together from little sensors, machine-to-machine communications, and then aggregate that and make that available for people to learn? This example is actually a knee osteoarthritis monitor. It basically replaced a big contraption that people had to put on their legs when they went to the doctors to measure knee degradation as part of deterioration of joint and things like that. And we just made a little sensor that could go on people's legs and be worn throughout the day, so it collected better data. But imagine all the opportunities that exist around collecting data for learning purposes, not just about your knee, and you certainly hope that you don't have younger students with these sorts of issues. But there are nevertheless exciting opportunities to learn about the human body, about your home, about energy, about all sorts of things through the use of sensors. Ericsson predicted that by 2020 there'd be 50 billion connected devices in the planet. That's not humans. That's largely sensor to sensor, and we're just starting to see that come to fruition at NBN Co. Active gaming, this is not an educational example, but I think it shows some of the exciting things that are going on. This is using Microsoft Cornick platform, and I note that one of our partners in this project was ARNet. It was connecting 8 elderly people who were socially isolated in their own home for virtual exercise classes. So in this virtual exercise class, we've actually got 3 different participants. The woman standing at the front is an exercise instructor who would be standing at, for example, council premises. The 3 different people behind are all in their own individual home. They get brought together into a virtual room to be able to participate in an exercise class. So imagine applying something like this to an educational outcome. We see the opportunities are just phenomenal. Really exciting use of off-the-shelf technology, Microsoft Connect platform. And of course, others could work equally as effectively. UniTV, I mentioned IPTV as a platform. UniTV is taken the bog standard internet protocol television platform designed for commercial free-to-air, commercial entertainment, for example, Foxtel or equivalent type of services and repackage that for an education platform. This was something that we did at the Melbourne University. So the idea was that you could get not only access to your educational content, it would also embedded video and all sorts of other things. So it was a one-stop platform for all of your educational needs. It meant that the university could control a whole load of information and access around identity and authentication. And it also meant that the end users had much easier access to a whole raft of content from their own homes. And I think that's a really interesting platform to be explored in the health sector, but also more broadly in education. I mentioned haptics, force feedback through the internet. We actually at IBIS developed an application that was a cochlear ear surgery simulator. We were approached by surgeons who wanted to put an extra step of training into students who were training to be young surgeons. So what we developed was this simulator that essentially replicates the surgery that a cochlear ear surgeon would undertake. The idea is the ultimate goal that the surgeon will be performing the surgery in a theatre and the student will be able to hold onto a device that will be replicating exactly what the surgeon's feeling. So it will drill down through bone and it drills down through soft tissue. This is just the prototype for the fixed design, and you can certainly drill through bone and arteries and all sorts of things and really feel what it's like to do cochlear ear surgery. I have to say I demonstrated this somewhere upwards of 100 times. I never didn't kill my patient. I hit a major artery every time and now have a pathological fear of cochlear ear surgery. But the idea that you can use haptic devices to actually feel something on the other side of the building, the room, the world, whatever it may be, leads to an entirely new concept around education. It's not just necessarily visual, it's also how you can use the internet to feel what's going on. And you can think of all sorts of exciting opportunities around haptics coming to life. And ultimately, we see these devices being USB-style devices. There's a long way to go with the technology and development, but nevertheless, there are prototypes out there and some really interesting things going on. So enough about the exciting things that are happening. I think the rest of the conference is just going to explore that in far more detail, and I really look forward to hearing about that. I'll just touch on a few things on how the NBN will impact you. And that there's two ways that I see with the range of institutions that are here today. One is, how are you as an end user of the NBN going to get connected? And secondly, how are you as content providers going to use the NBN to facilitate transfer of your information and applications and innovation to your community, whether that be local, state, national or global. So if you haven't done so already, go to our website, www.nbncode.com.au, and have a look at the rollout map, and it's got a whole host of information about when the rollout is coming to you. I mentioned before that we are a wholesale-only open access network. That means we don't sell direct to you. You will buy a service off your internet service provider. So when you are thinking about how you connect to the NBN, do go and talk to your retail service provider about the NBN, what it means. I'm certainly here to come and help facilitate and understand how the NBN can be connected in your facility, but ultimately you need to have a discussion with your retail service provider about getting connected. One of the things to bear in mind is our product roadmap. At the moment, we've only got residential and small business plans in market. It's not till 2015 that we get enterprise-grade solutions. And I suspect for the bulk of the people in the room here, your institutions will be somewhere between a small business plan up to fully commercial plans. So that's something to definitely bear in mind. And the last thing that I'll just leave you with is the idea that the NBN, as it's currently rolling out, we're deploying 4 Ethernet ports to every single house. So at the moment in your home, you will have 1 internet service provider, but in the future, you have a potential to have up to 4 internet service providers in your home. So there is definitely a very real innovation concept around the idea of an education service provider into the home. And that might be, for example, an entirely different way of billing. And it goes back to that social equity argument. It could be, for example, that someone pays the bill and that information is distributed to whoever wants to every student, whoever they may be. So if anyone's interested in discussing that concept, I'm really happy to have a chat to you about that. So I mentioned that there are many, many different uses of these ports. So on that note, I'll leave it there, and hopefully there's a couple of minutes for questions.
So we couldn't let Kate go without giving the opportunity to ask her a few questions. What I would ask is, when you ask your questions, that you put your hand up and one of the staff from support staff will come around and give you a microphone to speak into. First cab off rank. Questions?
Just a very simple question. Is it envisaged that the price will be the same if you've satellite, fixed, wireless, or straight into your home?
It depends on the plan that you're buying, but essentially, yes, the pricing is very, very similar across the different platforms. If you're buying the 100 meg off the fixed line, it's very different from buying a 12 meg on satellite. It's a different product set, so there is definitely pricing differential there. But for the baseline product, the pricing's similar.
You did say someone had to ask it, but so the pointy question, change of government?
Change of government. Well, we're operating under the government of the day, and we have a statement of expectation that's passed down to us. So we will continue to operate under that statement of expectations until that's changed. But one thing that I would say is that the opposition have clearly, their policy has come a very long way from where it was 3 years ago, where we would have faced an NBN or no NBN. The reality is both sides of politics have said there will be an NBN, and we think that's a fabulous outcome for the country. We're going to have a significant network upgrade regardless, and I think that's a very exciting thing.
An ignorant question, sorry. With the sensor technology, how does that work if someone's, say, travelling all around Australia with their knee sensor on and they're bouncing from network to network?
It depends how they're set up. I mean, you can have them just from Wi-Fi, so it could be that you could store the information on the sensor and then when it hits a Wi-Fi router, it can just download onto that. Alternatively, it could bounce off 3G mobile. If it's across the entire of Australia, you'd probably want a storage capability on the sensor because satellite, having a mobile satellite device, you'd have to have a little satellite base station on the side of your thing. Wouldn't be so practical. But yeah, certainly between Wi-Fi and 3G, there's a lot of interesting things going on in different ways that they can be deployed.
Okay, we might wrap it there actually because we were.
Can I, one more quick
sorry,
one?
One question.
Just wondering, from the schools that are connected now, do you have any feedback on what they're using and how they're using their connections?
Yeah.
In terms of content?
We have some information. I think different schools are, and this is actually one thing that's something I didn't mention in the talk. I think the largest issue with schools using high-speed broadband is actually the workforce challenge in the school and helping teachers understand what it means for them. Because what we see is schools like Wollonga High that went through the training program are just doing the most phenomenal work, and the utilisation is so high. They're using incredibly large bandwidth, the full pipe at times. But other schools, we don't see that happening. It's sort of business as usual, and it's just a fatter pipe which is there if ever you need it. So I think that goes a long way to the work that we collectively need to do, is help support people to understand what it means to use technology, whether it's making sure the first time you plug into the NBN it works, the first time you participate in a virtual excursions it's a really meaningful experience, through to all the other applications that can exist on top of that. So huge variation is the short answer.